Hey, DM Dango here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at Drakes on a Plane. And yes, I'm serious. Drakes on a Plane is a 5th level adventure for 4 to 5 characters that should take between 3 to 4 hours to complete. It stars the wizard, Quintess Moneyphilus, and he's called the Melodramatic Magician. It's a very tongue-in-cheek style adventure. There are jokes abound, and there's kind of little puns peppered all throughout the adventure. For instance, the king's speech at the very end of it is quite well done. You don't see it coming at first, and then all of a sudden it hits you with that very clear reference to, if you haven't seen Snakes on a Plane, even then you will probably have heard this specific line. So, there you go. This is the kind of adventure you're getting if you pick this up. It's not super serious. It's not designed to be. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be played super serious. It's designed to be kind of, here's something fun. Here's something, just a little bit of lighthearted humor to go on a table. As a one-shot, it works really well and beautiful, and for certain groups, I can see them running incredibly well and really enjoyable adventures. 3 to 4 hours of you laughing your heads off as you fight the most ridiculous monsters on the planet. And, in addition to that, the monsters themselves are all unique creations. Everything you fight within the module is a unique creature, and that's a really good thing. It shows that there's been a lot of thought put into this. There's a lot of kind of extra effort made by the author to make sure that a player has a unique experience, which is kind of the main goal here. The basic premise is you're given a mission by the king to deal with some drakes that are being let loose upon his plains. And he needs you to go out and deal with them. Deal with the 2 drakes that are kind of rampaging across the countryside, and then go deal with the wizard creating them. In addition to the adventure itself, you're also given 2 extra supplements. One, a warlock patron for the drakes themselves, or dragon, kind of a dragon patron. And then in addition to that, you're also given the rules for wizards dueling, which is an interesting concept around what happens when 2 wizards duel. Think Harry Potter-esque style dueling in, I think it's the Order of the Phoenix that happens. It's really interesting in kind of, in addition to an adventure. It's not something I'd seen before. So, what did I like about Drakes on a Plane? Well, I liked a lot about it. I liked the art style. I liked it's very interesting. A lot of them had me laughing out loud, right when I saw it. This picture here is one of the best culprits for that. It's kind of like in the middle of a chapter somewhere and you just pop out and you're like, couldn't help but chuckle when I saw that. It made me laugh for quite a bit. But there are some other things here as well that I really loved. I love the idea of including spells. I love the idea of including other player options as part of an adventure, and kind of showing players what these things do in terms of an enemy and going, well, he can do that. Can I do that? Maybe I can do that. I haven't asked. I've just assumed. Well, now all of a sudden you've got this villain using spells and abilities that you don't have access to. In addition to that, in kind of that same vein, every monster you fight, minus the final, the wizard himself, is a unique enemy type with unique abilities. They also have legendary actions at level 5. So even though there's only 1 enemy per combat for 2 of the combats out of 3, it doesn't feel like a player would overwhelm them very easily. It can feel like a risk when you're fighting some of these creatures. It gives them that extra strength in order to survive long enough or do enough damage to drain a little bit of the party's resources before they go into final battles. Or maybe potentially the risk of life and limb is kind of present. But this adventure isn't really like that. And that's another thing I really liked, is that everything in the adventure is very well themed together. The art fits with the general tone and theming of the adventure. It's very tongue-in-cheek humor style, and the art fits well with that. Too often I see a very humorous-based adventure with very dark and gritty artwork from the stock art that you get as part of the DM's Guild, and vice versa. This fits very well. Everything kind of marries itself really nicely together. In addition to that, the formatting and everything else really brings that home. Right, now, what didn't I like about this? Well, I love the player options. They're fine and safe. Some of the choices made during the adventure, though, I think need some work. For instance, there's a lot of traveling from the king's place where you start, the castle, to the little town where you save them from this drake, to another forest, to the tower. It'd have been nice to include maybe some random encounter tables so you could have some variety there, some interest in something a little different. You're traveling from place to place. Yes, they're all very close to each other, but you got to remember we're being told that these drakes are rampaging. They're wandering around the wilderness, and while the one in the forest is wandering, you're kind of forced to come across it in some ways. So it's not really that wandering, is it? But it'd be nice to have included those kinds of things, especially with the option of maybe getting lost in the forest. You got to think that players wander around in dumb places and they get caught and do stupid things. So why can't they just get lost here as well? So that's like a thing that I've got. Another thing I will say is that the stat blocks are a little different. They're a little more unusual. They kind of read like a cross between a character stat block and a monster one. You don't need things like proficiency bonus. You just say they have a proficiency bonus of X, or you have an insight bonus of X, for instance. You don't need to add proficiency and then say skill proficiencies. It'd been nice to have them kind of the same as the monster manual. I know they're a bit boring and these ones are a little different, but it kind of keeps them consistent so Dungeon Masters know what to look for. They're not kind of trying to relearn skills. It's hard to work out, for instance, scaling. How do I change this for my party? If I'm level 6 or level 4, do I make adjustments? Do I not? How wide-ranging is this? It's very tight on the requirements, according to the author. Now, from what I can see, it probably isn't that tight. It probably is more like a 4 to 6, and you'll probably be okay to still run it without making any major changes, depending on your party size, which is the other thing that I would be very careful about. A lot of adventure modules use this thing called APL. I've seen it in a lot of Christian Eichhorn's things, and a few other places where he's had a hand. It's nice to have that because then you can figure out, well, if my party is this thing, I can scale it to this based on these. So it would have been nice to include scaling options for it, saying, well, if in this encounter, if your average party level is strong, weak, or very strong, here's what you can do to make the encounter still the way I intended it. And it gives a greater reach for your whole adventure. Finally, this is just a minor nitpick. It would have been nice to have clarity of monster placement on the final area. It got a little confusing when it mentions that the final wizard can do something, but it requires monsters on multiple levels, but yet it seems to imply that they're all on the same level with him in other areas. It'd been nice to just say there are X amount of this on this level, X amount of this on this level, and X amount of this on this level, and be done with it. Just so that it's very clear as to what things are starting at the start of play. Yes, the wizard and DM can automatically do this thing, so there are X amount of these things in the area. And I'm being vague here because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's an interesting encounter, but it needs that kind of like, well, I need to kind of make sure that things are in different places because I want him to be able to do the things he says he can do. In addition to that, we mentioned that he can be challenged to a wizard duel. Well, if you tell your players that wizard's duels are a thing, then they might cotton on to this. But that probably still wouldn't happen. They wouldn't understand that they can maybe do this and cause this thing to happen. Unless, of course, he challenges you to a wizard duel. But there's no incentive for him to do so. He's in a place of power and he has no reason to challenge you, and he probably wouldn't for the most part. However, if the players saw an event that occurred beforehand that led them to believe that these wizard duels were a thing, perhaps a random encounter in the forest of two wizards dueling over some silly argument, then they understand that wizard duels is a thing and that what the reward for completing and winning wizard duels is. Those kinds of things help players do the kinds of actions that they can potentially do. Now, they can still choose to ignore it, but at least you might have a chance of it occurring. At the moment, it feels like the way the adventure is written, that wouldn't happen. There's no way for that to occur in the final encounter. All in all, though, I really like the adventure. I love the tone. I love the art. It's a really well put together and structured adventure. It gives a really good feeling and nice to something to run. Maybe even as a first-time DM. You want to run something a little higher level so your players have some more powers and abilities. This is a great little adventure, especially for those groups that maybe you're trying to introduce somebody into D&D. And they've heard it's super serious all the time, and it's just this, like, super drama fest. They've seen Critical Role and they've seen High Rollers, and they go, well, that's always, it's 90% drama and 10% comedy. If they're more of a comedic person, they just want some laughs and some fun times, this adventure's right up their alley. It gets them to feel like this is something that we can play, and I don't have to feel like I'm in a K-pop drama. It's nice that way. It gives a good feeling, and it's a really well-structured adventure from that side of things. Now, on to my rating, though. So, I'm going to be using the perk system. Even though it does include some player options here, I think they're an addition to it. So, they'll probably go in the polish section. So, PERC, so C for combat. I love the combats in here. They're all interesting. They're all unique. The monsters all have legendary reactions. At level 5, it's not something you see, and it gives a good sense of a boss monster, like a big thing you have to hunt, a hunt target, without it feeling like a stomp because of the action comedy of D&D 5th edition. So I love the combat, and I'm going to give it a 5 here. The monsters are all interesting and unique and challenging without being overwhelming, which is a hard balance to strike. Next, on to roleplay. Now, there are some roleplay potentials here, mostly in the form of the final wizard, but only if a DM is willing to do the extra mile to kind of make that happen. As it stands, there's limited roleplay potential. You're basically moving from combat to combat without any kind of additional thing. There's some interesting characters to potentially interact with, but for the most part, you don't need to. And there's no impetus to do so. So I'm going to have to give the roleplay aspect this a 3, as it stands. Now, if you come back to it and add in that kind of extra section to show what Wizard's Duel is, that would help a lot, because then there's more roleplay potential during the final combat. It gives that kind of extra layer to allow that kind of thing to occur. Next, exploration. It is a very linear set of adventures, but there's lots of ways to solve the combats and the encounters that occur. And there is a point when you kind of have to figure out where you need to go, and that kind of allows for some extra exploration. However, like I said, it is a linear adventure. There isn't really anywhere to explore, so to speak. So for that, I'm going to have to give it a 3 here as well. Now, polish. Here's this where this really shines. The art is all unique. The extra player supplements are incredible. The maps are really good. Even if I would want one more, the only thing I might suggest is to include the art that you've included for each monster as a separate handout, so that those users who are using things like Roll20 can include them in the supplement they have without having to, cut them out from the files. All in all, 5 for polish. So that's 5, 3, 3, and 5. So that's 16. So a solid 4. A really great score. Improve some aspects in the exploration and the roleplay aspect side of things, and you're looking at a 4.5, maybe even a 5. So thank you. That's all from me, from DM Dango. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And do use my affiliate code down below if you decide to purchase anything. Thank you. Peace out.